Enter the Dragon revolves around three main characters. Lee, a man recruited by a British intelligence agency to investigate a martial arts tournament held in a private island owned and hosted by Han, a master drug lord, believed to have an opium trade there. Roper and Williams are former army buddies from Vietnam, and they enter the tournament due to different problems that they have. They all soon realize that Han uses the tournament to recruit new associates and expand his operation. Lee is a Shaolin martial artist from Hong Kong who possesses great philosophical insight into martial arts as well as physical prowess. In the opening scene, a sparring match of martial artists is on display at the Shaolin Temple with the monks and pupils gathered around. One of the fighters is Lee, who challenges an opponent considerably larger than him. Lee himself is exceptionally skilled, landing all his strikes successfully without getting a scratch. When he finally brings his opponent down, Lee forces him to yield. At the end of the match, the fighters show their respect by bowing to each other and the Sifu. Afterwards, several of the monks present raise their hands, creating an obstacle that Lee flips himself over easily, earning their applause. After that, Lee takes a walk with his Sifu, where he praises him as his talents have gone beyond the mere physical level onto the point of spiritual insight. The Sifu asks Lee what is the highest technique he hopes to achieve, to which Lee answers by saying to have no technique, and then the Sifu asks him his thoughts about facing an opponent. Lee states that a good martial artist does not become tense, but ready, not thinking, not dreaming, ready for whatever may come. The Sifu instructs Lee to recite the Shaolin Commandment number 13, to which Lee answers by saying, "A martial artist has to take responsibility for himself and accept the consequences of his own doing." The Sifu then tells him one thing to always remember about facing an opponent. The Sifu says that he should remember that the enemy has only images and illusions, behind which he hides his true motives, and so if he destroys that image, then he will break the enemy. For centuries now, the code of the Shaolin Temple has been preserved, and the honor of their brotherhood has been held true. The Sifu then proceeds to tell him a story about a former Shaolin student who deserted his vows by turning the ways of knowledge and strength to his own base ends. He has perverted all that they hold sacred, and his name is Han. The Sifu lastly instructs Lee that it is now his responsibility to reclaim their lost honor, as Han has brought disgrace to the Shaolin Temple. He then tells Lee there is a man waiting to meet with him. Shortly after, a British intelligence agent named Braithwaite approaches Lee, who invites him to speak over some tea. Braithwaite tells Lee that he received an invitation to a martial arts tournament on a private island organized by the mysterious Han himself. Lee then halts their meeting and gives a short lesson in harmony and control to a young male pupil of his, teaching the boy not to attack with anger or exposition. At first, Lee instructs the boy to strike him, but the young pupil only lands a light kick. Lee tells the pupil he needs to have emotional content. When the boy tries again, this time in anger, Lee stops him and tries again until he gets it right. As a final lesson, Lee tells the boy not to think but to feel by giving him an example of a finger pointing away to the moon, not to concentrate on the finger or he will miss all that heavenly glory. Lee also teaches the boy how to bow properly to earn the respect of an opponent. In the next scene, Braithwaite gives Lee a walkthrough about what they know so far about Han. They know he was a member of Lee's temple, a Shaolin monk, now a renegade. Braithwaite proceeds to show Lee the only film they have on Han. In the film, a man named O'Hara is seen, who is Han's personal bodyguard. Braithwaite then tells him more about O'Hara, showing a demonstration of him on how he is tough, ruthless, and also has a scar on his face. Then Braithwaite shows him the island Lee will be going to. After the Second World War, the nationality of the island was uncertain, and sometime later, Han bought it. Lee asks Braithwaite what he knows about his personal life, to which he says that Han lives like a king on that island, totally self-sufficient. He shows Lee a stewardess, Mary King, found floating in the harbor. Braithwaite says it's nothing unusual about a body in the harbor, but the girl was last seen at a party aboard Han's private island. They had reported her lost at sea before the body was found. The agency believes that Han selects attractive girls, methodically builds their dependence on drugs, then sells them to an elite clientele around the world. Lee asks what the autopsy reveals as the cause of death, and Braithwaite clarifies that the girl did not drown but overdosed. Braithwaite offers Lee a drink, but he refuses. Lee is going on an undercover mission as Han is suspected to be involved in drug trafficking and prostitution. However, since Han's island is only partly in their jurisdiction, they are unable to conduct any formal investigations. Lee requests for a gun, but Braithwaite tells him that Han will not allow firearms on the island, both to impede assassination attempts and to prevent the international authorities from gaining a justification to launch a raid. Their only contact would be the radio on the island, which they can monitor, but Lee has to get to it. Braithwaite reveals that they aren't an agency of enforcement. They function as gatherers of information, evidence, upon which interested governments can act. Braithwaite also mentions that 2 months ago they managed to place a female operative on the island. Since then, they've lost her. He shows him her picture and tells Lee that on the chance she is still there, she might have something, and says her name is Mei Ling. Han runs a martial arts school to protect his drug operations, and his only contact with the outside world is when he is holding the tournament every 3 years, which he uses to secretly recruit international talent and expand his criminal business. Even though the agency knows all this about Han, no solid evidence can be found linking Han to any nefarious dealings. Braithwaite wants Lee to attend the tournament and act as a spy. Lee is slightly reluctant, but ultimately agrees to help Braithwaite, believing his efforts will also redeem the Shaolin honor that Han has tarnished. Before Lee leaves for Han's island, he visits the old man of his Shaolin temple, who says he's happy Lee has decided to go to the tournament and that now is the time he knew about his sister, Su Lin's, sudden death. At the tournament prior to this one, the old man was in the city, along with Lee's sister. The old man tells him that many of Han's men had come in from the island. They were everywhere, bullying and arrogant. On their way into town, Han's thugs attack him and Su Lin. One of the men who led the attack was Han's right-hand man, O'Hara, who upon harassing them was given the scar on his face by the old man's blade. But O'Hara immediately subdued him afterwards and ran after Su Lin. Though she skillfully and bravely fought them off, she was cornered in an old warehouse. Rather than be beaten and raped, she killed herself with a shard of glass. O'Hara, being the main person responsible, stood there and witnessed her suicide. Despite feeling ashamed, Lee finds himself compelled on a mission of revenge as well. The old man concludes their meeting by telling Lee that when he gets to the city, he should pay his respects to both his mother and sister. Lee agrees, and soon after leaves the temple. Upon arriving at their grave, Lee says, "You will not agree with what I am going to do. It is contrary to all that you have taught me and all that Su Lin believed. I must leave. Please try to find a way to forgive me." Afterwards, a man named Roper is playing golf with his friend. He is also one of the selectees to attend the prestigious tournament. He asks his assistant to confirm the flight to Hong Kong for him. Roper then asks her how much money he has left in the banks, to which she answers it to be only $63. So he tells her to take it and makes his way to Hong Kong. Around the time that Lee is ready to board Han's sampan, 2 other men arrive. Roper, a war veteran who now is a fancy playboy of sorts with a heavy gambling addiction who totes a lot of baggage, has come to the Orient to hide out from the mob, to whom he owes money. In his last meeting with some mob thugs, Roper fought his way out of having his legs broken to repay his debt. The second man is Williams, who also is a war veteran like Roper. Before he started his journey to the island, Williams, being a black man, was harassed and attacked by the police right after meeting with his sensei in the United States. When he was attacked, Williams fought back, besting the 2 cops and escaping in their cruiser. Upon reuniting, Roper and Williams talk about how it's been 6 years since they saw each other. They fought in the Vietnam War together. Then they chat about what they know about Han, that he likes to live big, despite the city being poor. On the boat to Han's island, Lee and Roper both bet on a praying mantis match. Roper favors the larger of the 2 insects while Lee favors the smaller. Lee wins a handful of cash on the match. While Lee takes in the breeze from the harbor, an aggressive invitee named Parsons tries to antagonize him after tripping a boy carrying a load of fruit. He asks Lee about his fighting style. Lee answers it is the art of fighting without fighting. Parsons asks to show him some of it, and Lee just says, "Later." Parsons scoffs, trying to draw Lee into a match. Lee says they need more room and suggests that they take a small dinghy to a nearby island and practice on the beach. When Parsons eagerly climbs down to the boat, Lee releases it from the sampan and lets it drift out behind. Holding onto the rope and ordering Parsons not to pull himself in, or he'll set him adrift on the ocean. Lee then hands the rope to the crew members, who are greatly amused. On the island's dock, Han's hostess, Tanya, is waiting for them, which Roper admires greatly. The passengers see hundreds of other martial artists practicing on giant courts. She takes them to their room and says the banquet begins promptly at right. That night, everyone attends a lavish feast. Roper goes over to Lee and says he hopes he hasn't spent all the money he won from him the past day, and tells him he plans on winning it back. Lee smirks and asks when, and Roper says he'll find out later. Roper seems to be very much at home on the island and thinks Han has got a great sense of hospitality and a great sense of style, but at the same time he is apprehensive. On the contrary, Williams isn't fond of anything so far in the island. When he keeps ignoring the food served to him, Roper asks him if he's on a diet, but Williams says he'd like to eat if he could find something he could keep down his stomach. Han arrives, bidding welcome to his guests, praising them for their skill and thanking them for attending. He says they honor their island. Han states he is looking forward to a tournament of truly epic proportions. He has several women with him who act as his elite personal guards. Han tosses several pieces of fruit in the air while the women hit them with small darts, thrown with pinpoint accuracy. Lee catches one of them. After dinner, the competitors are all offered girls of their choice by Han's hostess, Tanya. Tanya brings young women to Roper and Williams. When Williams takes several women to entertain himself, Roper requests to spend the night with Tanya herself. Han has given strict orders to the competitors not to leave their respective rooms, but Williams breaks the rule, saying he wants to get some fresh air, even though one of the women he is with warns him not to step outside his room. When Tanya visits Lee, he requests the young woman who threw the dart in the apple he'd caught at the banquet. Lee meets with the dart thrower, Mei Ling, who is a spy sent by Braithwaite prior to recruiting Lee. Lee asks Mei Ling if she saw anything, because she says there's not much as she's kept in the palace and watched at all times. She tells him that she's found out very little about Han's illegal activities, except that many young women who come to the island disappear. They're summoned to Han's at night, and the next day they're gone. Lee later sneaks out of his room. Evading Han's guards, he finds a hidden trapdoor that leads to several underground chambers where Han has been cooking opium. He subdues a few of Han's guards and is forced to retreat when the possibility of being discovered becomes too great. As he sneaks back to his room, Williams spots Lee climbing a nearby wall. The next morning, Han attends the first few rounds of his tournament. He finds that Roper and Williams fight exceptionally well. Roper lays a few bets on Williams that pay off, and has Williams lay down more bets. The two win a substantial amount of cash. Han appears and announces that last night, one of his guests seemed to not be content with the hospitality of the palace, leaving their room after curfew and sought diversion elsewhere on the island, attacking some of his guards in the process. Han states who it was is not important, but that his guards performed their duties incompetently, and now they must prove themselves worthy to remain among them. He has his greatest fighter, Bolo, kill them all as punishment. Han later sends a message to Williams to meet him in his quarters. Roper is suspicious and tells Williams to watch his back. In his meeting with his host, Williams is praised by Han for his abilities, though they are unorthodox. Han mentions that Williams fights more for glory than harmony, but Williams shrugs off Han's opinion, saying he fights to look good. Han then accuses him of attacking his guards the previous night. Williams is immediately angered, saying he was outside but he wasn't the only one. He then demands that he be allowed to leave the island. Han refuses and a few of his thugs attack Williams, who defeats them easily. Han himself takes up a combat stance and the two fight around the close quarters of Han's office. When Williams tries to kick Han in the hand, he inexplicably injures his foot. Han takes advantage and finally beats Williams down, killing him with a single blow. He removes the glove from his left hand, revealing that it's made of solid bronze. Back at the tournament, Roper beats a few opponents. Lee is called up to fight O'Hara, one of Han's champions. With the memory of his dead sister to guide him, Lee lands several lightning-fast hits on O'Hara. O'Hara suddenly grabs one of Lee's feet with Han barking at him to let Lee go. Lee counterattacks with a vicious backflip kick to O'Hara's chin that knocks him back. To finish him, Lee delivers a ferocious kick to O'Hara's chest, knocking him into a few chairs and some of the spectators. Enraged, O'Hara grabs 2 bottles, breaking them and brandishing the necks as weapons. Lee knocks the bottles from O'Hara's hands and kicks him to the ground. Lee then lands a fatal blow to O'Hara's throat. Han is flustered, telling the crowd that he has been disgraced by his champion, and he leaves the court silently. Han later meets with Roper, who is actually expecting Williams to meet up with him. Han insists on Roper staying and shows him his extravagant home. They enter a museum-like room where Han says it's difficult to associate these horrors with the proud civilizations that created them: Sparta, Rome, the Knight of Europe, the samurai. He states they worship strength because it is strength that makes all other values possible. Nothing survives without it. The room is filled with glass display cases and Eastern weapons. In one case are the bones of a human hand. Han cheerfully says the severed hand is a souvenir. He takes Roper into a room with a guillotine, placing his own cat under the blade. He tells Roper that real loyalty is being able to kill at request, but Roper refuses to pull the release rope that would kill the cat, and releases it. Han pulls the rope, which activates a platform that lowers them into the lower levels of Han's house. Down there, Han takes him into a room filled with several women. Roper mistakenly thinks it's a pleasure room, but Han reassures him, saying they're his daughters, and also his most personal guards. One of them easily takes Roper down upon him, reaching to greet her. Then Han takes him to a room where he makes opium, which stuns Roper. Han says the business of corruption is like any other, and Roper agrees. Roper states that if you provide your customers with products they need and encourage that need a little bit to stimulate your market, then pretty soon your customers will depend on you. Han praises him for his understanding and makes Roper a generous offer to join his operation. Roper finally sees that the tournament is a whole setup to recruit new talent. While tempted to join, he witnesses dozens of prisoners and asks why they're here, to which Han answers that they're just lost, drunken men who no longer care where they find themselves each morning. Shortly after, Roper blatantly refuses the offer when Han shows him the body of Williams, hanging over a deep pool. Roper is visibly upset at the sight of his dead friend, and Han has the body dropped into the pool. Han says there are certain realities he wants them to have a clear understanding. Roper glances over at the men who dropped Williams into the pool and tells Han there is no misunderstanding between them. Needing to investigate further and to find a radio to get a message out to Braithwaite, Lee infiltrates the lower level again that night, picking up a cobra placed at the trapdoor to scare off any snoopers. While inside, Lee witnesses several young women imprisoned in cages, one of them shouting he helps her, saying she's only 17 from California. Lee ignores her and proceeds with his mission. Lee finds his way to the radio room, using the cobra to force the radio operators out. He gets his message out by telegraph. When he's discovered by Han's guards, he battles them, beating them with his fighting ability and their own weapons. After dispatching the last group, he rushes into another chamber but is trapped by closing metal doors. Above him, Han tells him that his fight with his guards was magnificent and that he was planning to recruit him. Lee, however, has no desire and allows himself to be taken prisoner. Meanwhile, Braithwaite discovers the message sent by Lee and abruptly contacts the colonel. The next morning on the tournament courts, Han asks if Roper is good enough to participate in this morning's edification. Roper asks what he's planning to do with Lee, when Han tells him it is him who will decide that. Han orders Lee and Roper to be pitted against each other. Roper says there's a point he won't go beyond and refuses to fight. Han says he was right about him, and they shall strive to be worthy of his sense of grandeur. Han menacingly says he'll find opponents for them to fight, starting with pitting Bolo against Roper. When Lee steps in to help, Roper stops him as this is his fight. At first, Roper lands multiple punches to Bolo, but soon after he strikes him with a big blow that drops Roper to the ground. Bolo then attempts to force Roper into submission by holding him in an arm lock, but Roper escapes by biting his leg, and the fight continues. Bolo carries the fight to his advantage for a few minutes, until Roper battles back and lands a hard kick to Bolo's crotch, taking all the fight out of him. Infuriated, Han orders some of his men to attack both Roper and Lee, but with their set of skills, the duo takes down each opponent one by one easily. Angered even more, Han sends all of his men after Lee and Roper, and a long fight ensues. Meanwhile, Mei Ling frees all of Han's prisoners, directing them out to the tournament courts where they engage Han's men. As the duo has some backup now, Lee moves on Han, who who takes off his fake fist and replaces it with a clawed appendage. Lee battles him, receiving a few slashes but is able to disarm Han when the drug lord has his claw stuck on a table. Han runs off to his house with Lee right behind. In his trophy room, he takes an attachment for his wrist consisting of several sharp blades. As he approaches Han, Lee says he has offended his family and has offended the Shaolin Temple as well. The two square off. Han is able to slash Lee several times, but at the same time Lee is able to beat him back, countering his every move and landing his kicks several times. Han then wields a spear from his arsenal. However, Lee successfully dodges the attacks, causing his spear to be stuck on the wall. After that, Han is forced to retreat behind a hidden door his spear is stuck in. Lee enters the room, finding that it's entirely walled with mirrors, creating a maze. He moves slowly and deliberately, watching for Han. Han strikes Lee a few times, slashing his back as Lee is left confused where Han is actually hitting him from. A furious Lee manages to get Han a few times but is unable to finish him off. Then he gets a flashback from when the Sifu told him to remember that the enemy has only images and illusion behind which he hides his true motives. So, if he destroys that image, he will break the enemy. With that, Lee is finally able to work out an effective strategy. He begins breaking the mirrors around him, eliminating Han's advantage. He then puts his back against the mirrors to better see when Han comes to attack him. As Lee finally finds Han, he gives him a vicious kick to the chest, impaling him on the spear he tried to use against Lee. Roper sits on the tournament court exhausted after the victorious battle with Han's men. He glances to the side and sees Tanya's lifeless body lying amongst the wreckage. Lee arrives back at the court, and they exchange a parting glance with a weary thumbs up just as the military helicopters arrive in response to the distress call. The movie ends with the final shot of Han's claw stuck in the table. What do you guys think about Lee's real motive behind him going to the tournament? Was it to really restore the lost honor of Shaolin Temple, or to actually avenge his sister's death? Let us know in the comments.